Thank you very much. Great. Well, we are going to call this meeting to order. This is the Sustainable Economy Task Force, and it is 2:10 p.m. on Thursday, July 25th. We're here in the Wendell Chino building, thanks to MNerd, and we are recording this meeting for your awareness. We unfortunately do not have interpretation available for this meeting. So that's for your awareness as well, but we will get that fixed for next month. So we will start off with roll call now that it looks like we have a quorum. So do we have HED? Not present. Do we have GSD?
Yes, Secretary Doucette's here.
Wonderful, thank you. Do we have PED? Rizzi Gutierrez?
Yes, present.
Wonderful, thanks. And I'm EDD. Do we have DFA? I believe they were excused. MNerd?
Here.
MNerd is here. Do we have environment? Nope. State lands? All right. DWS?
Present.
Present. Tax and Rev?
Present.
Great. Chair Poviwa?
Here.
Michael Chacon?
Present.
Present. And State Investment Council? Nobody. Okay. Great. I will now go ahead and get the agenda up for you folks. Let's see. Minutes. There we go. All right. This is the agenda for today's meeting. We'll get right into it after this is approved, and this was circulated in advance as well. Do we have a motion to approve this agenda?
So move, Secretary Doucette.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Raquel Gomez. I'll just note for Crystal, who's speaking. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Seeing none, the agenda is approved, and now we'll go to minutes from last month. Okay, these are our June minutes, and these were also circulated. Do we have a motion to approve these minutes?
Secretary Doucette.
Wonderful. Second?
Second.
Okay, that was a second from Raquel. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed?
Chair, I just wanted to note that I was absent for that meeting, so I will abstain.
Okay, thank you, James. All righty. Well, now I think we can move right into our presentation. So today's topic, and I hope you can kind of see us and read our faces okay. We're here, we're very animated, but we might look a little bit far away from you. So now that I'm still screen sharing, I'll just quickly get up a document that I thought was relevant to today's meeting, which will be about infrastructure access. And so we have two wonderful presenters here to share with you their expertise from different vantage points on this issue. If I can, let's see. Is there a full, you guys know how to?
Do you want multiple pages?
I just want it to be just this and not all the top stuff.
Oh yeah, you can at the right above where our picture is, there's a little arrow farther over to the right, down. Now, just like it's the bottom of the toolbar on the right side of SharePoint, there's a tiny little arrow that points up. It's like a carrot. Yeah. Next to share. So in the toolbar, to the right of where it says SharePoint,
Right, right, down.
down to the caret next to the right of where you are right now. There's a
Oh,
little
that
caret
guy.
like that. Yes.
I just learned what a carrot is.
It's not, these are not the
you.
orange kind. Yeah.
We bring all sorts of skill sets to this meeting.
Thanks for the vocabulary.
Okay,
Absolutely not an arrow.
so I found a carrot. We had a great focus group recently with the COGS, and we asked them this question among other ones. This is anonymized. I have their consent to use it. But so we asked them, what are the most urgent and pressing needs of your communities? And these are a lot of different answers. I hope you can see them. I'm still screen sharing, but so in almost every single one, infrastructure appeared. And we know that we've received a lot of feedback from regional governments to more fully consider their comprehensive economic development strategies and other important regional initiatives in our statewide plan. And so I think one important point of emphasis, especially when it comes to rural communities, is to bring attention back to the importance of infrastructure. And so you can see here in these answers, the first one says strategic infrastructure and shovel-ready sites. Workforce is another theme that appears frequently. Housing is another one, water infrastructure in particular. And if we scroll down, let's see, housing, healthcare, workforce. Some of them highlighted a need for talent for key positions such as accountants, auditors. We saw a couple of answers talking about grocery stores. Here's another one, infrastructure, healthcare access, transportation services, economic leakage to larger metro areas, lack of jobs and investment, lack of staff capacity, infrastructure, capacity to take on grants and federal funds, infrastructure to support businesses. And there are kind of a couple of themes. That's why I'm excited that we have both presenters here today, because some of these answers reflect a need for infrastructure to support economic development from the perspective of attracting businesses. And then other ones are more so talking about community infrastructure. But I think today's presentations will show you that the two are interrelated. So that's what we have in store for you. And with that, I'll go ahead and see if I can get this other presentation open. And that looks like a good button. Okay, cool. Great. Can everybody see that online?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, well, Rebecca, I will let you introduce yourself, and I'm your guy for flipping through these, so let me know.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really nice to be here with you all in the Sustainable Economy Task Force. My name is Rebecca Roos. I'm with the Office of the Governor. I am the Infrastructure Advisor to Governor Lujan Grisham. I've been in this role since October of last year. And prior to my work with the governor's office in this role, I was a deputy cabinet secretary, and prior to that, water protection division director at the New Mexico Environment Department. And so have been on the periphery of great step force work for a number of years. And it's really nice to be here with you to talk about infrastructure. So I also have with me Denise Gonzalez. I want you all to know that she, as well as a resource, we've got both of our contact information for you at the end of the presentation. So let's go ahead. All right, so this topic for this group with the amount of time is tricky, right? Because infrastructure is certainly bigger and broader than I even understood when I took on this role. I'm not too ashamed to admit that. There's all the obvious work around water infrastructure, built infrastructure, roads and bridges, and energy infrastructure and broadband infrastructure. You know, these sectors that we touch in our work as an infrastructure team for the state. But how we get things done in communities to build infrastructure, to improve infrastructure, to plan strategically for the infrastructure we need for tomorrow, means that we're spending as much time thinking about what I call the connective tissue that holds it all together, as we do thinking about specific projects for, you know, a highway segment or rebuilding a bridge or fixing a drinking water system. All of those projects are incredibly important, and we spend a lot of time thinking about and working on those types of projects. But the way in which we approach our work for the state as an infrastructure team is much more complex and challenging in a lot of ways. But we're going to talk about that as I go through this. So just bear with me. We're going to hit some things a bit deeper. We're going to do broad strokes on a whole bunch of things, just in nature of respect for the time in the meeting. But I am more than happy to come back for deeper dives if and when that's appropriate. And also, you know, any member of the task force and the public should feel free to reach out to us separately. All right, so program priorities for when we think about state infrastructure. This is, you're going to see, it doesn't talk about outcomes necessarily in terms of specific program areas like climate or clean energy, but this is kind of the buckets that we work in. So leveraging and integrating federal funding, and we'll talk a little bit more about state funding in a moment. Revitalizing local economies, so that connection that Kayla just mentioned between infrastructure improvements and development and economic opportunities for communities is inherent. The capacity piece, which came up in that feedback from COGS again and again and again, addressing local capacity to maintain and enhance infrastructure, which then, if you're doing that well, you're getting all of these additional benefits at the community level that comes from having strong and resilient infrastructure. Building local capacity for that, kind of changing the status quo across the state of New Mexico in rural, urban, suburban, tribal communities is, for me, the main reason I was interested in this role and doing this work, was to try to shift the default for our communities in terms of that local capacity. And as I'm sure everybody on the meeting today knows, that is easier said than done. It's sometimes easy to build a little capacity, but holding on to it, that's a different matter entirely, right? Modernizing our state infrastructure programs means a lot of things, but you know, one example of that is looking at the incredible work and focused expertise and programs and investments we've had at the state for decades in some cases, for transportation, for water and wastewater infrastructure, for energy infrastructure. But to modernize those programs to meet today and tomorrow is another endeavor. And we have an incredible opportunity right now with unprecedented federal funding for infrastructure investments, the biggest climate law ever that's driving more money into infrastructure, workforce, capacity programs, and clean energy and climate action than ever before. So we need to meet this moment and make sure that our state programs, as good as they've always been for us, only get better as we continue to leverage these federal dollars, draw in more expertise into our workforce, and continue to put our state programs in a better and better place. And then the prioritization of infrastructure around climate resilience and decarbonizing our economy is, as a group like this knows, I talk to a lot of audiences that aren't so steeped in the sustainable economy and climate and energy space. But even when we're talking about roads and bridges, if we're talking about a wastewater system that serves a community of 10,000 people, there are climate resilience and decarbonization components to that. So it is a common thread, and it is, as we all know, a huge priority for our state legislature and our governor, who created this task force, and the advisory council. And so it's front and center for us. And the last point is my all good government should be tracking and measuring their progress. This is somewhat still aspirational for me and for the governor's infrastructure team, but we are continuing to work toward having a set of measures and information that we can share with the public, check in with ourselves, have other people hold us accountable. Are we getting where we need to go? And for a portfolio as broad as infrastructure in a state as complex as New Mexico, that's definitely a work in progress, but something that we look forward to sharing more about in the coming months. Next. All right, so this is my kind of bubble graphic that's not too sophisticated whatsoever about all of the component parts that, not all of them, but some of the key ones that are in play for us if we're going to have more resilient infrastructure in communities across the state of New Mexico. We need to be thinking about each of these 6 items in the outer rim. Workforce issues, another theme in the document that Kayla shared from COG feedback. And I separate workforce and human capacity because there's the workforce to build things and maintain infrastructure. And then there's the human capacity sort of at a local government level to manage programs, to manage projects, to pull down federal funding. So those are closely related but separate. Federal funding and the capacity and opportunities to draw in federal funding is huge. And there's more of it now than ever, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. And state funding is often overlooked. We take it for granted, right? That there's capital outlay money to go into infrastructure projects at the local level. And we have work to do as a state to improve how we more effectively utilize the dollars that we're putting into and investing into infrastructure from our state coffers to better leverage federal funding, to complete projects or complete phases of projects, and more. So that's a huge factor. And we also have, even though there's more federal money than ever, there's not nearly enough. Our needs in broadband, for example, tomorrow we're going to have a really big broadband announcement that's embargoed, so I can't tell you the extent of it. But even with this new federal funding for broadband, our team at the Office of Broadband Expansion and Access has calculated we have a $2 billion shortfall to connect throughout the state of New Mexico. And if you don't have broadband, you don't have, you're held back, right, in terms of being able to have a thriving community. So state funding is not just a factor in terms of how we manage the existing types and sources of federal of state funding for infrastructure, but we need to right size our level of investment, especially while we're in a period of unprecedented year over year record surpluses. And then just really quickly, we'll talk more about, well, today we aren't going to talk so much about private sector investments and partnerships, but those are key pieces of the puzzle. The quote on here is overdone perhaps, but I don't care. I use it anyway, because for me, this is part of my recalibration and compass if and when I need it, that we are in a change management mode. We are trying vigorously to put our state in a better place. And we can't do that without making some tough decisions, having hard conversations, and really challenging the old guard and the old way of managing programs and investing in communities. So this is a compass for me. Next. All right, so really quickly, because I know I just used up probably all of my time, there's 2 big federal sources of funding, which I wanted to at least mention to you all. We don't have a chance to get anywhere near in detail on them, but bipartisan infrastructure law, that's what BIL stands for. I didn't spell out my acronym, sorry. That's also, if you hear of the Infrastructure Investment and Job Act, IIJA, exactly same thing. 2 terms, same law at the federal level. The bipartisan infrastructure law funding into New Mexico so far, as of May, $5.7 billion. That keeps going up. BIL funding, almost for most of the federal programs that are funded through BIL, received authorization through that law that was enacted in November of 2021 for 5 years of funding. There are exceptions to that. There are some programs that only get 1 year of BIL funding, others that are, variations on that. But for the most part, it's 5 years of funding that started flowing in calendar year 2022 out to states and territories and tribes. So we're a little over halfway through the 5 years. Yes, just about maybe at the halfway point. And we've seen funding come in for transportation, broadband, water, clean energy programs at MNERD and other places. There's great workforce programs. And in the next bullet around where we talk about local capacity building and technical assistance, one of the key things that I try to convey when I talk to audiences about BIL is not just there's a whole lot of money for a whole lot of projects, but the context, the other components of the bipartisan infrastructure law represent the largest ever federal investment at the time in local capacity building and technical assistance. And just as a point of reference, so you can see the sub-bullets, like some of the key funding that's come in, but that's by no means exhaustive for technical assistance, expanded resources. But for context, I like to bring people back, for those of you who were living it or those of you who were not. Back in 2009, when we were in a recession, the then Biden administration passed ERA, the American Recovery and Response Act. It's very similar to ARPA, and I get the two mixed up. But ERA back in 2009 was it was a surplus, it was not a surplus, it was a stimulus bill. A stimulus bill to get the economy going again, and it represented a huge investment in federal dollars into infrastructure. And they did not have an emphasis on capacity and technical assistance. What ended up happening was communities across the country that were ready to go with projects got more money. Those that weren't ready to go got left out. So it was the haves and the have-nots, and it reinforced in many states and many communities, especially in rural and lower income states, it reinforced that divide. And what I appreciate about what Congress and the Biden administration did in 2021 with BIL is say, we learned from that and we don't want to do that again. We want everybody to get to come to the table, all communities, no matter their status. And it might mean that for the first few years of 5 years of funding, some of those communities are in the capacity building stage and not yet in the project funding and building project stage. But at least there's a focus on bringing those communities along. These programs, some of them have been more or less successful in my opinion, from the federal level. There's definitely some that are making an impact and getting out into our communities across the state of New Mexico, but we have more work to do to ensure that we as a state and our communities and entities that can avail themselves of this assistance know where to find it, know who's giving that assistance, know how to sign themselves up for it, and move forward in their projects. And that's one of the things that Denise and I are really focused on, is better connecting the people who need assistance with the assistance that's available. And then, like I said, with the TA and local capacity and my 2009 ERA example, the other real important takeaway about BIL is that so much of the funding that is actually allocated for projects around different types of infrastructure have some degree of prioritization to get those dollars into historically disadvantaged communities. And that's where the BIL aligns with the President's Justice 40 initiative, which was created exclusively through executive order, but they kind of implemented elements of it through BIL. Next. It's stuck because I talked too long.
Yeah. Yeah, click.
Okay.
There it goes.
Okay, so shifting over to the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act is the most significant piece of climate legislation in the US. And depending on who you're talking to, they'll claim that it's the most significant piece of climate legislation in the world. I can't vouch for that because I haven't done that research, but that's what people say. Nonetheless, it is instrumental and it is transformative, and it is funneling a ton of new resources into New Mexico. And it, again, is very heavily focused on equity and a just transition around climate and energy goals. And it's very heavily focused on historically disadvantaged communities. So just a couple of snapshots here, both of which relate to MNERD's Energy Conservation and Management Division programs for energy rebates and Solar for All. Both of those programs will be managed out of MNERD and for the state, and both are focused on low-income households and residents in the community in the state. And more of that is going to be rolling out. We've gotten these announcements this year, the award for Solar for All earlier this year. We haven't been awarded the home energy rebate program funding yet, but it's coming. So these are programs you'll be hearing a lot more about in this year and into 2025 next. Okay, and then Inflation Reduction Act, another really novel thing that Congress and the Biden administration did with the IRA is create this whole direct pay paradigm. And the Inflation Reduction Act creates new programs or expands existing programs to get funding into states like the ones that we just talked about on the prior slide. But the biggest thing the Inflation Reduction Act does is it's a tax credit bill to incentivize climate friendly action, right? And tax credits, generally speaking, traditionally speaking, go to entities that pay taxes. And so any prior federal tax credit law has left out governments at the state, local, and tribal level. Well, not anymore, not with the Inflation Reduction Act. Direct pay is cash back for state, local, tribal governments, nonprofit organizations, public schools, universities, non-tax paying entities. If you're completing a project that's eligible and you are an eligible entity and you properly and timely file a tax return, even though it's not technically a tax return, that's what the IRS is calling it. If you properly and timely file, you will get cash back. There are not ceilings of dollars available for these tax credits. You just have to be an eligible entity who completes an eligible project and you file right, and you file on time, and you'll get money back. And depending on how you're doing your project, you may get 10% back, or they have these step ups. You could get up to 70% back from the federal government on the project that you might have been doing anyway, right? So this is huge. It's a huge opportunity for us as a state and all of our governmental and NGO partners across the state to get more cash back. But it's complicated. It's hard. We as a state government are still trying to figure this out. And so I know from my conversations with counties and municipalities that if they've heard of it, they don't know where to begin. And most of them haven't heard of it. So we're going to have more coming. Let's go to the next slide. So coming soon, Denise and I are working closely with the Treasury Department, the U.S. Treasury Department, to plan with partners a few webinars in September and October for key constituencies. So we're going to do one that's focused on local governments, one that's focused on the education sector, and one that's focused on tribal governments. And those will be open to the public as well, but we're going to target to those particular audiences. And then we're also going to host a direct pay workshop as a kickoff to this year's annual New Mexico Infrastructure Finance Conference, which you can see the save the date there, is October 28th through 30th. So that workshop is on day one with no other competing events on the conference calendar. So everybody should get their butts in the room for the workshop. And we're excited to use that as a deeper dive, meet people where they are as best we can. And hopefully people leave that workshop, whether they're a local government, a tribal government, a nonprofit, they leave that workshop better informed about what direct pay is and with an idea of what they do next. They won't have it all mapped out, but they'll have at least like a clear idea of next steps. And then for state agencies, since that is what our task force is made up of, I want to emphasize that first bullet that we have a deadline coming up real quick to file for projects, eligible projects that were completed in calendar year 2023. And that same deadline applies to all other types of entities that are eligible. But in terms of our state agencies, there is going to be a survey going out to agency heads and CFOs tomorrow to get information about what the total list of 2023 projects is, so that we can pre-file in August and then file our actual tax returns no later than November 15th, which is when we start to lose the opportunity to get that cash back for projects that were completed last year. So we're coming up close, and we now, fortunately, DFA has Deloitte tax team on contract to support the state in doing this work. Okay, next. Some national resources and tools. You'll distribute these slides, Kayla. So just know there are some links here for resources at the national level. Invest.gov, the first site. Go to the next slide. Looks like this. I just have some screenshots. If you go to invest.gov, this is a national White House website, but then you can select New Mexico, and you can toggle between private investments and public investments. Every dot on the map is clickable. It doesn't give you a ton of information about a project, but it's better than nothing. It gives you something to start if you're wondering where are these dollars going, and into particular communities, parts of the state, or for particular types of programs. Next slide. The other thing, here's an example when you're on the private investment side. So they have at the bottom, if you can't see it, semiconductors, so that's CHIPS and Science Act projects, clean energy manufacturing, batteries and EVs, biomanufacturing, heavy industry. So on the economic development side, this is a map at the federal level that's tracking where are those federal dollars going into private investments around these national priority economic development sectors. Next slide. All right, so that was federal level tools and resources. Now we're switching into New Mexico specific key resources and tools. The federal funding dashboard was launched earlier this year with much work done by Department of Finance and Administration and a whole bunch of state agencies that have been putting their data in so we can track federal funding for the public. We will see a slide on that in a second. The Grant Plant is a nonprofit. They've done some work in coordination with DFA under contract to put together a catalog of local assistance programs. So that's a great resource if you're working with local communities to make sure they know about that catalog. The Invest in America fact sheet is a White House document, but it's very handy. It's tidy, it's short, they update it once a month, and you can get a high-level snapshot of where those BIL, IRA, and CHIPS and Science Act investments are going into New Mexico. Connect New Mexico is our broadband page. The match fund, we don't even have time to talk about the match fund. It's this huge, amazing, wonderful thing that we created this year, and there's $75 million initial infusion. There are 3 separate grant programs under the match fund, and you can find all that information on that website at New Mexico Match Fund from DFA. And the demand is incredible for those dollars. We expect to be fully allocated in actual grant awards for match or contingent awards that tie up those funds pending the results of the federal application. We expect to be fully obligated maybe by the end of this month, even if not early August, as more award letters go out. So it went incredibly fast, and we are going to be using all of that data to calculate our request to the legislature in January for the next infusion into the match fund. The 5th-year water action plan has a lot of really key pieces in there for water infrastructure with a focus on climate and climate-related impacts to our water resources. And then we have a newly created this year and launched as of July 1st at the beginning of the fiscal year, Infrastructure Planning and Development Division at DFA. The Federal Grants Management Bureau, which has existed for a number of years, is now in that division, as well as what will be, when they get fully staffed out, a broader team at DFA to lean in more with local communities on their infrastructure planning, like developing their their ICIP, their infrastructure capital plans, and helping communities think beyond capital outlay to fund their infrastructure projects. So there's going to be more supported DFA, among other things this division will do, more support to help a community that has their ICIP in place think about what is appropriate for capital outlay and where are the other places they could be going for funding to fund other of their priorities. And then Ana Nurtamoya is a federal grant navigator on staff at DFA and on call for state agencies, for local governments. She is amazing with what she does. And as a generalist, she can get specialized pretty quick. And she also has a newsletter, an e-newsletter that she puts together, and you can email her. I encourage everybody, if you aren't already, get on Ana's email list. Next. All right, so the dashboard, this is a really short snapshot of what it looks like. This actually should be updated because as we show on the next slide, we have just done some enhancements. But this gives you a general sense. It's ARPA money, BIL money, IRA money. And right now it is limited to federal funding that's flowing in through a state agency. We are not getting data from local governments or other entities in New Mexico that are getting federal grants. They aren't required to report anything to us. And so far we haven't set up any voluntary ways for them to do that either. But if you wanna see how federal dollars are flowing into state agencies, and if a federal dollar is flowing into state agency, it's most likely not stopping there. The vast majority of money that flows from the feds into our state agencies gets out into communities, right? So this gives you an ability to look at that in terms of geography, if you choose, by categories, and you can see status of projects, spend down rates, et cetera. Okay. Here's the enhancements. You can now do keyword searches within your results. That's going to be so hot. I'm going to use that all the time. And we also have new subcategories added to allow you to refine your search results even better. And there's information on the dashboard itself if you have other suggestions for how we can continue to improve it to do that. Also, for the state agencies who are here, we may not have the people who are involved in doing the data entry on this in this meeting, but your colleagues who do the data entry quarterly to keep this updated. DFA is continually trying to make that process for them easier and more efficient and less burdensome. Next, we're almost done, Kayla, I promise. Okay. This is the arrow's in the wrong place. I apologize for that, but just an example of where we sometimes lean in to key priorities. The 10,000 Communities Initiative, which a number of the agencies on Set Force participated with us in this convening in March, was focused on the Milken Institute's 10,000 Communities Initiative, which is focused on small, mostly small communities across the country, with the idea of touching 10,000 communities across the US and territories to help these communities meet their needs and address their priorities. And so we had a convening, and there's more to flow from that. There's nothing formal that's flowing from it, but it's got a lot of conversations started, a lot of good networking, a lot of ideas. And in the blue bubbles are not the be-all end-all of rural infrastructure challenges, but it's a set of rural infrastructure challenges that we teed up for deeper dive conversations and that we'll keep coming back to move the needle around rural infrastructure challenges in New Mexico. And I'm open to ideas and feedback from any and all about how we can continue to improve our focus on rural communities as well. Next is our contact information. And I'm sorry that took so long, Kayla, but that's one gist of what is happening and what our opportunities are around infrastructure investments.
Wonderful. And we will have these on our website. So thank you for sharing them. And now I believe, there we all are. Now I believe we're gonna go to Melinda. So take it away. And then if it's okay, can we take questions after?
Yeah, I'll be here.
Okay, all right.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for having me and allowing me to kind of talk to this group. I do not have a beautiful slide deck like Rebecca does. I'm just going to have this as a more informal conversation. And And I'm gonna give you some background here about the New Mexico partnership if you're not aware, so you understand why we've been invited to this conversation. The New Mexico partnership is the state's designated entity for lead generation for new projects to come and locate within the state of New Mexico. So we are the ones who are actively recruiting companies and projects, private industry, to come and locate within the state of New Mexico. I've been at the partnership for about 6-7 years now, but doing economic development in the state of New Mexico for almost 17 years at a rural, local level, county level, regional, now at a state level. And so I've worked with all size communities, worked with all types of projects, all types of industry sectors. And so some of the information that I'm sharing today is coming from that experience to really talk about the changes that have happened in what we call the economic development recruiting industry space, if you will. And what does that mean for New Mexico? What does that mean in general? And what are the challenges and opportunities as it relates specifically to infrastructure? Because there are some significant challenges and opportunities. So to kind of set the framework, COVID changed how economic development was done. Prior to COVID, we would get a 10-tabbed Excel RFI for a project that had hundreds of questions for every new project that wanted to locate within the state of New Mexico, right? And it would go into a deep dive of the project, all of the project information, all of the job categories, all of the requirements, right? It multi-tabbed, hundreds of questions for each and every project. Things changed in the world, right? We went from a just-in-time manufacturing situation to a just-in-case situation as supply chains got more and more complicated. So the speed to get things up so that manufacturing can take place, that products could get where they need to. There was legislation about having US made parts for a lot of industries. That's driving a lot of interest. It changed in that COVID timeline. Like, I don't think COVID caused any of those changes. It just highlighted the issues that were already there and blew them up, right? Just blew them up out of the water. Now, post-COVID, I get questionnaires that are really 5 questions. Do you have a site? Do you have power? If not, by when? Do you have water? If not, by when? Do you have wastewater? If not, by when? Do you have incentives? If you cannot answer those 5 questions, you're done, right? Only after you answer those 5 questions, then they'll send you the multi-$100, 100-question questionnaire and do a deeper dive into the project and everything else. It changed completely how site selection is working for communities. Other things that have kind of impacted us, and not just New Mexico, but nationally, there is, during COVID, a lot of the new development monies went to recovery, right? So new sites were not being developed. The number of projects did not go down. So all of those projects then gobbled up all of the available sites across the entire United States. So by the end of COVID, when we are now, okay, now we've recovered, if you will, and are starting to reinvest, you're starting at scratch from no sites. And so on the one hand, put us on an even playing field, but on the other hand, we are not spending the hundreds of millions of dollars that other states are in developing new industrial sites. And so once again, we're falling behind because we don't have sites available. In addition to that, right, all of these things piling up on each other. A lot of industries have new ESG goals where they are trying to be climate friendly. They're trying to electrify their processes and have those electric power pieces come from green sources, right? Which means they are reducing the amount of maybe natural gas into their plant, but increasing the amount of electricity, which creates another issue. Before COVID, I could count on one hand the number of projects we had over 5 or 10 megawatts. Now it's the reverse. I can count on one hand the number of projects that are under 5 megawatts, right? And so you're seeing these huge demands for more power, for industrial water, access to wastewater treatment, and in time for them to start operations. Because timeline to market is key. If you cannot deliver infrastructure in the time it takes to build a building and be ready to go, you're out, right? And in most cases, we don't even have a plan in most communities. I'll just frank talk right here, right? No rose-colored glasses today. Open and honest conversation about where we're at. So all of these things have really put a lot of pressure on the state of New Mexico. At the partnership, we see between 60 and 70 projects look at New Mexico every year. That's on average about 60 or 70 new projects. I currently have about 230 plus projects in our pipeline of projects that we're working on. A lot of projects. About 72% of those are manufacturing. Before COVID, it was a 60-40 mix of 60% industrial, 40% office. After COVID, it's about a 98% industrial, 2% office. I think I've only done 3 office projects since COVID, right? Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Discussion, let's do it.
What's an office project in an economic development sense?
It's a project that is going into an existing office space. So it might be an office headquarters or financial processing or back office operations or a headquarters or something that could go into an office space, a non-industrial type of project. So we're seeing that mix. We also see about an increasing number of projects that are willing to consider rural communities, right? Because one, there are no sites. So they are willing to go where the site is. And I have even had companies and projects tell me, if the infrastructure is there, we don't care about anything else, we'll make it work, right? Even if they're talking 100, 200 jobs. That we'll figure it out. If you have the infrastructure, we're there. Right? But over 65% of our projects are open to those rural opportunities, which is a lot. Okay, so there's a lot of opportunity in a wide variety of industries. So let's get real about the numbers. Of the 60 or 70 projects a year, we know half the projects aren't going to go anywhere, right? The company either cancels the project, they expand internally, they don't realize the customers, they don't realize the funding. Something happens where that project just doesn't go anywhere. We didn't lose it, we didn't win it, nobody won it, nobody lost it, just didn't go anywhere. It's the nature of the game in economic development. We win between 15 and 18% of our projects, which is actually a pretty high rate. We lose 1% for supply chain issues, right? They need to be closer to a supplier. We lose 1% for labor issues. Where it's a very large project and the only place they can go is in a very small location. The rest, which is about 30% or more, we lose because we do not have or cannot get infrastructure on time to the project. That 30% represents billions of dollars in investment and thousands of jobs. This is where there is real opportunity for New Mexico. If we can figure out a way to overcome that issue, it's job creation throughout the entire state. It's capital investment throughout the entire state, right? There are numerous opportunities within this space. Just to kind of give you an idea of the size of the type of projects that I'm talking about we were the #1 choice until we couldn't get infrastructure. Food manufacturer, very interested in Gallup. They were their #1 choice. They could not get infrastructure within the 14 months that they needed to serve the site. It represented over $300 million in capital expenditure, over 100 jobs in a rural community, right? That were going to be good paying jobs. Another project in Hobbs, they've lost a couple of different projects because of infrastructure, but most recently, it was phase 1 of a manufacturing process, would have been over $200 million in investment, over 100 jobs. The infrastructure that they were trying to tie into was built in the 50s, would have had to been completely redone and expanded. Couldn't do it in less than 3 years, right? And the project says, no, we got 14 months, right? Because we've got equipment coming, it's got to be come and plug in. Right? It happens all the times. An aerospace project, they didn't care where in the state of New Mexico they wanted to go. They just needed a hangar on an airport somewhere in New Mexico, wherever. 75 jobs, all paying high six figures. Not a single hangar in the entire state of New Mexico could we find for them to go into, right? So it's these types of things over and over again that are the hard ones. When we know we are the number one choice and we can't get infrastructure there in time. Let me kind of give you an idea of the scale of the infrastructure that we've been asked for. And I'm going to give you low end, high end, because projects range the whole scope. But then I'm also going to give you most frequently, right? Because most frequently is where we kind of need to be planning and aiming for. If that's where the majority of the projects are asking for. So on the electricity side, on the low end, it ranges 1 to 5 megawatts. That's the very low end. On the high end, I've been asked for as much as 2,000 megawatts. Okay. In the last 2 years, I've probably been asked for over 8,000 megawatts of power worth of projects that we're all seriously considering New Mexico. Most frequently, we are asked for between 30 and 60 megawatts. There is nowhere in the state of New Mexico right now where you can get probably 5 or more than 5. When you're talking timeline to build electrical infrastructure, as you know, it is extending all the time. On the low end, you're probably looking at 36 months to get a new substation in on the low end. And if you need a step down or other loop systems or anything else, those can also be expanded. Anytime there's a natural disaster anywhere else that takes out a power grid, you can expect that timeline to increase, right? There is no supply chain available. We're finalists on 7 projects right now. 2 I know we're gonna win, which I can't tell you about because everything's covered under an NDA. But if we win all 7, that's over 200 megawatts of new power that has to go on the grid in the next 24 months, right? We are talking significant investment, significant utility requirements, and we have to have a path forward because the capacity is not there currently. If you're talking about adding transmission and generation to support those additional services, I've been told in some cases it's 7 to 10 years. Well, how do I tell a company, well, I'm so sorry, we can power you in 10 years? They're going to laugh in my face and hang up the phone, which they've done, right? So there has to be a pathway to be able to get that in that 24 to 36 month window on electricity. We don't really have a choice.
Yeah, I was just curious. You answered my question if it was generation and transmission, but it didn't.
It's both. It's on both, right?
And are your supply chain issues primarily with the substations, or is that also panels, turbines, transmission lines?
It's
all the above.
So transmission lines themselves are not the problem. It's
Towers.
The approval process to get the transmission
So
line.
it's all permitting.
Yeah. So, but on supply chain, right? It's the boxes. It's all sizes of transformers. It's circuit loops. It's step down stations. It's everything that you need to create that new process. Yeah. So you're talking minimum 36 months.
So we don't have enough surplus generation to be able to, meet these requirements.
No.
Okay.
No. On the generation, yeah. And on the generation side, it's a lot longer, right? Because if you had to have new generation resources, especially right now when we're saying we're only going to add renewable, well, then the utility has to go out for an RFI that year. They can only put so much new renewable on the grid at a time to make sure that the grid is stabilized, right? Then they have to build a generation. And then so you're talking 3 years, 4 years before that generation is built and then getting it tied into the system.
And even if these companies wanted to do behind the meter generation, it would still be 3 years of permitting probably.
Less if it's behind the meter. Some utilities are not allowed to do behind the meter. Right? So there's some regulation issues as well. So it's a combination.
Thank you.
And so, we've been in heavy conversations with the utilities and the communities and folks at EDD. Okay, how can we shave 6 to 8 months off that timeframe, right? For a community. But even if we shave off 6 to 8 months, that gets us that much closer to that timeframe. When we talk natural gas, on the low end, 25,000 cubic feet a year. On the high end, 3.3 billion cubic feet. Most frequently in that 200 million to 500 million cubic feet. In most cases, natural gas is the easiest to solve. But as long as, and I'm going to say this with the caveat, as long as right-of-ways are in place. There is a new trend because of some projects that happened on the east side of the United States where project got announced in a community and they did not have the rights of way in place to extend the utilities, and it blew the project up. And so now when they ask for utilities and what your plan is for expansion and how you're going to serve the site, they tell us, if you do not have the right of ways in place, do not propose the site. We will not accept it. Right? So not even having those in place is now, a disqualifier.
Could you clarify some of the right-of-way issues that we have here? Are you talking about right-of-ways along existing pipelines or other?
So for new expansion, right?
So additional pipelines
Right.
next to current in place pipelines.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
And-
So taking from wherever maybe you need to go off of the main trunk line and you need to go into a new industrial park. And so rights of way in New Mexico are not as bad as in some other locations, especially if you're going across state land, you're going across municipal land, it's one landowner. It's fairly straightforward. If you have to go over multiple landowners under an interstate, under a railroad, whatever, forget it, right? You're talking about a very long process of being able to get that. And so what all of these projects are trying to do is mitigate that timeline risk on what is it going to take to get their project to turn the lights on and be able to start running their equipment. And so if you're saying, well, yeah, we can get the building built in 2 years, but it's going to take an additional 8, 12, 24 months before we can get this because of that extended timeline on rights of way. But no, they can't touch it because the risk is too high. They have to get their product to market.
So all the pipelines have their rights of way? No.
The existing do. The new ones do not. The companies are saying, if you don't have the right of way, you're not ready. Or you're not ready for development. You're not ready for this project.
So the pipeline can be permitted, but they don't have the right of way?
Existing. So we're talking where you have to extend new infrastructure. So in most cases, anything that's less than, let's say, 150,000 square feet, 200,000 square feet, that is going to go into some kind of manufacturing flex space has to be ready to go today. No ifs, ands, or buts. If you don't have it, forget it, right? Anything over than that, or that is a specialty build, you probably have 24 months, 18 to 24 months, because they're going to have to build the building. It's usually going to have something specialty. They're going to have a higher utility requirement. So they know you're going to have to extend utilities into that site. In most cases, in the state of New Mexico, you're talking about a greenfield site that does not have any infrastructure. So you're talking about pulling in lines from somewhere that has existing, already permitted, ready to go, through a location that is not permitted into a new site, right? And so you're saying, okay, starting from ground zero, nothing, to up and running has to be done in 24 months.
And this is a problem for all states? No.
Because some states are funneling hundreds of millions of dollars into new industrial sites every year to have a turnkey site that they can say, welcome to our site, here's the keys.
Wow.
You're ready to go.
And that's because they have the staff capacity for permitting, or what?
They've got they have the money and are willing to invest to get it done.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, it's a big issue. It's a complicated issue, right? Because we talk about site readiness all the time of how do we get our sites ready for these types of projects? And it's hard because, you're talking about these ranges, okay, anywhere from 5 megawatts to 100, 200 megawatts. How do we right size that site for site readiness? But part of that site readiness is having a plan in place. right? Understanding what the community is, what their targets are, what those targets need as far as infrastructure, and what is the plan to get them there, right? Everyone wants to jump on the chip manufacturing, right? Because it's big, it creates jobs, it's awesome, it's amazing. And I say, great, so show me your site. And then they say, oh, but there's no water and there's no wastewater. And I'm like, okay, but you realize chip manufacturing takes a lot of water, right? And they're like, oh, well, you know, we could get it. Oh, not really. What's your wastewater capacity? Oh, you're at capacity. So no, you're not ready. You can't support that project right now, right? So it's understanding what that is, what that looks like, what that growth means, and what is the pathway to get there, right? Most communities throughout the state of Mexico, let's be honest, have between 3 and 5 good industrial sites that they're trying to promote. There is no reason why a community can't address those sites and say, this is what is at the site today. If we needed to run water, wastewater, municipal infrastructure to the site, this is the path where we would do it, right? Whether it's along a road easement, along an existing path, right? Having a plan of, yeah, we know it's going to take us this long, and we know it's going to have to go this far, right? The number of times I get asked, and it happens every time, right? The timeline, well, it's going to take us 6 months to do an engineering study to be able to tell you, which is great and all. I have 2 weeks to respond to most companies. If I don't have an answer in 2 weeks, I'm sorry, we're cut, right? Nature of the business. So it's understanding what you do have, where the gaps are, and how you're going to get there. Even if you're not ready to do the physical build yet, but having that, right? And then that's an 8 to 12 month process that you can cut off the total timeline if you have it in place. So it's a complicated issue, and I totally get it. So for water, the asks on the low end are in the 2,000 to 6,000 gallons per day. On the high end is over 8 million gallons per day. Most frequently, you're looking at 250,000 to 750,000 gallons per day. When you talk wastewater, on the low end, 2,000 gallons per day. On the high end, 4 million gallons per day. Most frequently, between 200 and 500,000 gallons per day. So when you think of most municipal wastewater treatment systems throughout the state of New Mexico, there's a couple of issues, right? One, they're built for municipal waste, not industrial waste. And so they have a hard time filtering anything out that has a higher TDS content, which if you're in the manufacturing space, it's going to have that higher TDS. So you're imposing already additional regulations on them that other states don't, because you're not set up for it, which then is a very costly treatment system before they can discharge. And 2, any one medium-sized project is going to max out or cause an expansion of any wastewater treatment facility in most locations throughout the state of New Mexico. Timing, as you know, to get those expansions, the money, the engineering, everything in place can be 3 to 5 years. So now you're saying, okay, one project in any one community, and they're done for 3 to 5 years if they don't start planning now. And then in 5 years, when they have additional capacity, then we can come back with another project, right? So those are some of the constraints that we're working with. And I know it's hard because everyone wants to wait until they have that project to say, okay, now it justifies us having this need for expansion. That's too late. It's too late. And so it's this constant balancing act of, okay, how much do we need to plan for growth without going too big, but also not making it so we can't attract projects and we can't support any additional projects, right? I recognize it's a hard balancing act. But if we don't do anything, we are going to continue to lose these opportunities. And it's only going to get worse as other states continue to invest and build in these new industrial sites. If we continue to do things the way we've done them, we're going to get the same results. And our competitive edge, once again, is starting to slip because everything that leveled us off is now over. And now we're starting to fall behind again. So there's this huge need for utilities, for utility infrastructure, and for communities to be thinking strategically in the long term and And how do we get there? I love when communities come and they talk to me and they say, hey, we're gonna open up this new industrial site. And I'm excited, but they haven't done a master plan. They haven't done a phase 1 environmental. Utilities are 2 to 3 miles away. They don't have a plan to get there. And so then I have to tell them, okay, but in reality, I cannot market your site for at least 3 years, is what you're telling me. So what other sites do you have? Oh, well, this is our best site. Well, my hands are tied. Okay. If we, as a state, want to be in the business of economic development and having new businesses come in and new industries come in, we have to start thinking strategically and future forward. We cannot be reactive. We have to be proactive, planning for the future, planning for additional growth. It's the only way we're going to be successful. Otherwise, I'm not sure why we're in the economic development game, quite honestly. It is what it is. I know, and that seems very harsh, and I don't mean it because I am the biggest advocate for the state of New Mexico. I will go after anything that I think fits or that will go for us. We've won projects that no one thought we could win. And so, the desire is there. Companies are definitely looking at us. We have been busier than we have ever been, ever. And so there is so much interest, so much opportunity. We just have to find a way to get there, right? I can't do anything about that 52% of projects that don't go anywhere, but that 30% that we lose, that's where we have that huge opportunity to attract these jobs and attract this investment and really make a difference in a lot of communities throughout the state of New Mexico, not just in our metros, but every community throughout. That was a lot. That's kind of my soapbox, but happy to keep having more conversations, having question and answers, open it up for discussion. Kayla, if that's appropriate.
Yeah, so why don't we open it up to our task force? I'm not sure if anyone online has an input. Maybe we'll go there first. And then I know some folks in the room have questions as well.
And I apologize that I was turned away from the cameras.
Do any of our task force members online have any inputs? Chair Poviwa?
Well, I just wanted to thank you both. This is incredibly informative, and thank you both for all of your hard work. And just wanted to elevate that, there are particular, there is ways that we can help work on solutions from the council. We'd be happy to do that. And especially as we head towards planning for the legislative session, the 60-day session, when there are so many opportunities for us to potentially solve some of these issues. We'll also say, for instance, the $75 million match fund is a good example of that. And then also added technical resources to agencies. So thank you both. And I will also just preview that I'm hoping at our next task force meeting, I'll be able to present some council recommendations, especially with an eye again for the legislative session.
Thank you so much, James. And Marcella, I see your question. We're just going to get one task force question in here in the room, and then we can go to you.
I was curious, so the issue, it sounds like small communities don't know what they need to do in order to get a project. They think that the project comes first and then they do the work to have the project happen. But it sounds like they need to do 3 to 5 years of pre-work to make a site that's available. So then you market it, and there's going to be somebody who takes that up.
Yes and no, right? And I hate to say it depends, but
that's always the answer.
Always it depends, right? Every site is at a different level of readiness throughout the state of New Mexico, right? Are there any truly shovel-ready, fully infrastructure sites in New Mexico right now? No, right? Because power is an issue. There are different sites in different communities that are at different levels of readiness. Some have done some of that pre-work. The the master plan and the environmental phase one and the assessment and everything else. And then now they're waiting to build, right? Because it's hard to get infrastructure monies to justify an expansion if you don't have an end user, right? And so that is the caveat, right? I know others who have been working on trying to expand wastewater programs or wastewater treatment systems, but right, they have to apply for money for engineering. And then next year they apply for money for pre-construction. And then the next year they apply for money for construction, right? And then can they afford to maintain the plant afterwards? And so then you're looking at a multi-year expansion plan because they can't do it all at once. And whether that's local capacity, they don't have the funding, they don't have the matching funds, whatever that is, it could be a different reason for every community. And so it's having programs that are flexible enough to meet the communities where they're at. Most communities have an EDO who is very aggressive on trying to promote their community and their sites. But oftentimes local leadership has very rose-colored glasses on about their communities and the realistic expectations of what their site is and is not. And sometimes there's a disconnect there. And so it's having the forward thinking to say, okay, realistically, where are we at? What can we support and where do we want to go? And some communities are further along in that process than others. And so it's a really community by community, case by case basis, unfortunately. Yeah. I can't say there's a one size fits all for everyone.
One thing that I wanted to add to that too, and for context, is the realities of when communities fall behind in maintaining and upgrading their infrastructure, how cascading and compounding the impacts are. So you have communities that may know that they need new economic development projects to come into town, but their school is run down and the community center is beat up and their roads are busted and their drinking water plant is not able to treat their water to, you know, the federal limits. And so how do they choose equip the new industrial park over all of those things when there isn't nearly enough funding to go around for any one of those priorities, let alone all of it at the same time. Yeah. So we are a state not alone in this, but certainly on the one extreme end of the spectrum, I think, in terms of having living in the pain and reality of decades of underinvestment and to catch up and meet all of those needs and seize opportunities at the same time is vexing and it means that these infrastructure prioritization at the local level is incredibly difficult for these local leaders.
I 100% agree.
My immediate response to hearing you speak was, you know, developing some sort of playbook for rural communities. Oh, I have this type of site. What can I do? And then like, what are my options? And then what do I need to do to get to those options? But it doesn't sound like that's actually really the need.
The wonderful thing about New Mexico is we are a very diverse state. And so every community has their diverse goals and plans and what they want to be and where they want to go. It's how do they get there? And part of it, yes, it's okay, how do we address the issues while also planning for growth?
Yeah, there's more immediate needs, like my school's run down or the water system needs, you know.
Yeah, but if you also don't do both, then you can't get new growth. And new growth is where your new tax dollars come in, which gives you more funding for these projects. And so it's a balancing act, right? And so, you know, I'm on a couple of different groups, and some of the things, you know, we've been talking about and discussing is, okay, well, are there grant or planning dollars where we can say, okay, you know what, you need a phase one, you need engineering dollars, you need this. Let's help you get that part of it done. So that when you are ready, you can answer the question, yes, I know our water line is 1.5 miles away and we're gonna need this and we're gonna need a lift station and we're gonna need this. And from the day you say go, it's gonna take us this long and it's gonna cost us this much, right? Can we help communities get to that point?
So it's really tailored.
Yes, yeah. It has to be flexible, has to be tailored based on the site, because there are sites multiple sites in the same community that have different needs as well. So it has to be flexible, it has to be tailored. And yeah, so that you can get the site and the community at where they're at.
And do you see your organization as providing that support, or is that more?
I do not have the bandwidth or frame to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
I have 5 people on my staff.
Yeah.
And our sole purpose is to go out and recruit companies to come in. So we're maxed out on, on capacity. I don't have the capacity to do that.
Let's get in a question from Marcela, who's joining us online.
Hi, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. Rebecca, Melinda, so helpful, so informational. I'm Marcela Diaz with Somos Un Pueblo Unido. We're a statewide immigrant-based economic justice organization. We're doing a lot of work to figure out how to help improve workforce development skills training programs for difficult to reach workers, especially in rural communities, and immigrant workers. There are a lot of immigrant oil and gas workers, of course, in the Permian Basin. So that's sort of why you'll get the questions that I have. And one is for each of you. I'll start with Melinda because you're freshest on our mind. And that is that you had mentioned that 1%, or you estimated that about 1% of the lost projects that don't come to fruition is in part because of labor issues. And it was unclear to me if that's labor issues related to once the new projects are up and running, or if the infrastructure delivery, enhancement, maintenance, improvements are also suffering because of labor issues. And so I was just, and lack of workers to actually do a lot of that infrastructure work. And so is it more than 1%, or did you really just mean 1% across the board? There are lots of workers to fulfill all of the aspects of this.
Labor, literally 1%. There's only been one project in the last 3 years that didn't locate in New Mexico because of lack of workforce, right? Because they needed over 1,200 workers, and the only site that they could fit in was in a very rural, very small community that no way could have supported 1,200 workers. And so, I mean, on the one hand, I guess that's infrastructure because we didn't have a site with infrastructures in another location. But the reason they gave us is not locating is because there wasn't enough workforce.
To fulfill the jobs that that project would require, I'm assuming.
Correct. Yeah, because when you're talking 1,200 jobs in a community that's under 10,000, that's a hard ask. Right?
Okay, so all the infrastructure issues that you brought up before the projects even decide to the 3 to 5 year infrastructure building that needs to happen for a lot of these projects, is that you didn't mention labor issues as one of the reasons why it's taking 3 to 5 years, that it's not as fast as it needs to be. And so I guess, is that an issue? Is that are there not enough workers trained in those infrastructure jobs to deliver and improve the infrastructure in that 3 to 5 year period?
That is, so I will say on the construction of large buildings, so when you're talking construction jobs, yes, we hear that that's an issue. Most locals have national tie-in and they will bring in workforce from other states. Just means you've raised the cost of your project, right? Because now you have to pay prevailing wages and you got to bring people in, and it raises everything, messes everything up. So I haven't had labor as the infrastructure build out be an issue. Construction labor is always an issue. And then a very small amount for labor of the actual project.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. It was unclear to me, and so I just wanted to get a sense of that. And then for Rebecca, is it okay if we ask about Rebecca's presentation as well?
Yes, yeah, this is questions for all presenters.
Okay, Rebecca, you had talked about and Melinda, everything that you said, I mean, we were texting some of us on, and we said we have to go back and listen and then continue to fill our notes for everything that you talked about. Do you have all of this somewhere in writing? Is it a part of an infrastructure challenge report that we can look at, or do we really just need to go back and listen to the presentation again?
I can try to send Kayla a summary. I don't, because again, most of what I do is covered under an NDA. So I'm spilling the beans a little bit today, but I'll send some highlights to Kayla and she can share it out with everyone.
Thank you. And then for Rebecca, also incredibly informative, and I look forward to getting our hands on your PowerPoint. You had talked about 5.7 billion already in our state from BIL. You talked about some of the other really amazing programs from IRA IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. I am wondering if there is, I know I haven't taken a look at this map, but I'm going to look at that map to see the projects by state agencies. We are also very interested in what cities and counties, local governments are asking money for as well. But it sounds like that's just harder to get our information about. But I'm wondering, of all those projects, is there some place where we can see, or do you know how much of that funding is specific to expanding or creating new workforce development training programs? And so so expansion of ones that exist, but also just creation of new ones. And it can be in maybe DWS. I know DWS is working, but we do a lot of work with adult ed and integrated education training programs. They have, there's some energy auditing certification programs, things like that. Like, is there a place where we can track how much of that is coming specifically to the creation of those new kinds of certification programs, where they're at? Are they multilingual? All of that good stuff. Are you keeping track of that? Who's keeping track of that, I guess? Is that DWS? Where can we get information about that?
Well, I'll answer and then I'll see if Raquel has anything to add. So on the federal funding dashboard, there is, you can sort by Department of Workforce Solutions or you could sort by category around workforce. I'm trying to pull it up right now because it is smartphone friendly. And so I'm just making sure, because I haven't looked at the workforce piece in a long time, so I'm not misleading you. Okay, so we don't have workforce separated as a category on its own, but you can search by Department of, hold on, it's not showing me. I'm so glad you asked this because it could be an oversight on our part when we set this up. No, there they are. They're in there. You can search by Workforce Solutions. Sorry for the roundabout answer. And then it's updated quarterly. So keep that in mind. It may be a little dated based on, depending on when you're looking at it. But that's one source to see how federal dollars are flowing into that department for workforce. But I'm going to talk with the team about adding a category around workforce because Workforce Solutions is not the only agency getting federal funding for workforce development. MNERD is, EDD is, and transportation is, I believe. So we'll work on that so that you could search more comprehensively for workforce funding that's flowing in to any agency, not limited to Workforce Solutions. Raquel, anything you want to add about where they can find information?
No, I think you put it perfectly. Marcella, I think the question was, how can we track the funding that's coming in specifically for workforce and creating new jobs? Right. So the Department of Workforce Solutions can track the funding that's coming into the department and those funding opportunities that we've partnered with other agencies that have a workforce component that we're managing. But like Rebecca said, every other agency has that workforce component that DWS might not be involved in. So I think there's a conversation to have with how we're tracking those workforce dollars.
Yeah, and Marcella, as Raquel was talking, I looked again at the dashboard features, and there is a parent category for, I was looking alphabetically under W, but it's under education, childcare, and workforce. That's together as a big category. We've just been building in subcategories. So if you go to the dashboard today, you'll see a subcategory for workforce by itself, but the project data in the dashboard isn't linked to the subcategory yet. So that's part of the ongoing enhancements. So it's all in there, but it's not linked to that workforce subcategory. So you could search by education, childcare, and workforce. And then you'll get more than the workforce data, but it'll at least give you something to play with for the time being.
And then lastly, Rebecca, this is more of, it's about the match fund, but it really is about cities and counties or local governments asking for some of this IRA, BIL funding. And it's my understanding that a lot of cities and counties don't usually request, or with very few exceptions, do workforce development or fund workforce development or ask for federal money, at least particularly in rural communities that they can either pass through or use for local providers. And so I know you're tracking it by state agency, but with the match fund, I imagine you'll be tracking what the match fund goes to and what they're asking. And so if you're not doing this, maybe you are, maybe it's something to think about. We're concerned that because cities and counties aren't used to requesting that money in general and doing that work, that they might, even though there is workforce development money, they may just not ask for it. And so I am curious as to if that's been a flag for you, if you're thinking about that. Like, we would love, one, how do we track it? But two, we would love for cities and counties to actually ask for more, even if they just pass it through to projects in their communities, their workforce development programs. There are a lot of community-based organizations providing, that are just nonprofits, providing a lot of really great workforce development training in all of these things. And so I'm wondering if that has been a flag for you, if you're thinking about that, if you've already thought about it, and then just tell me that you've already thought about it and it's already working.
So it's a great question. I've thought about the interplay and some of the barriers between local governments going after federal funding in a general sense, not so much specifically in the workforce development context that you just framed it. So I've thought about it more broadly, and we talk about that issue a lot, those barriers in local governments going after federal funding, and there are a lot of barriers. The match fund is intended to address a couple of them. One, the match itself, and two, a capacity component, because there's an extra, one of the 3 grant programs established through the match fund is a capacity expanding component for a local government to get additional money to hire a project manager, a federal grant compliance expert, an attorney, an engineer, whoever they need to do their project. To go back to one of your piece of your question, we are planning as the match fund implementation matures a little bit more, and we have a growing data set of awards made and issued. And then as we hear back from the match fund recipients, whether they got their federal grant or not, we are going to be figuring out ways to add all of that data into the federal funding dashboard. It's not there yet because the program is so new and we just started accepting applications on June 12th, but that will be coming as a way to share more information. Beyond that, I think that there's really good pockets of things happening and new things starting. Just meet local governments where they are, and outside of match needs and barriers, for all the other barriers that might be keeping them from pursuing federal funding or other sources of funding. To your point, they don't know what's there, or they don't know where to begin. Sometimes it's those things. So there's work in place, I think, through the infrastructure division at DFA to do more in that regard, in addition to the great work of the local government division there. The Infrastructure Finance Conference is an annual event, is a great place for local governments to come and gain expertise, train their staff, and learn how to go after federal funding for whatever purpose. And we're looking at ways in our office and our team in the governor's office of creating a technical assistance online navigation tool to bridge that divide between the people who need support and the support that's available. And we're hoping to have a contractor on board to start building that out this calendar year and then be able to launch it next year.
Great. Thank you for that. I part of why I asked these questions about workforce development dollars within IRA and BIL is because so much of our workforce development, and you can attest to this, of course, Beckett, most of our workforce development infrastructure is based on a certain federal funding source, which is WIOA dollars, which is very restrictive in many ways. And so in many ways, it's very restrictive. So our big concern is that as we continue to ask for at every level of government, these funding that we're still going to be utilizing those very confined funding, like the infrastructure that we've created in our state, because it's been primarily funded by WIOA. And what's wonderful about workforce development dollars from the federal government through IRA and BIL is that they're less stringent. They actually don't have as many of the requirements that exclude like undocumented workers as well as others that WIOA has. So that's why we're constantly asking about the interconnection between the workforce development dollars. So I just put that out there as something to think about as we continue to ask for this funding. It is actually less restrictive as WIOA dollars.
Thank you so much, Marcela. To be courteous of our hosts here, I'm going to move us to the next. We're going to breeze through the last few things on the agenda. So you all have access to the memo that Chair Poviwa and I compiled. It's called Taking Stock of New Mexico's Sustainable Economy Advisory Council and Task Force. I'm going to put this, I put it on one slide because I thought we might run short on time. These are key points from the memo. Please read it if you haven't already. It tells you about how we've consolidated this work since gaining dedicated staff capacity at EDD. There are some points about process, making the plan shorter, prioritizing the items that appear in the plan, making sure that we don't drop the baton in terms of both authorship and implementation, and having embedded stakeholders, putting a greater emphasis on community and tribal engagement, investing in dedicated staff capacity to carry forward strategic planning for the future of our state, including, you know, within the purview of SB 112, transitioning away from reliance on extractive industries. And then there are things about substance. We identified themes that have appeared in advisory council and task force conversations over the last several years. And so those include things like harnessing new federal funding opportunities, again, pursuing a prioritization of our strategies, increasing a focus on communities experiencing the impacts of the energy transition, but also marginalized communities, rural communities, and placing an emphasis on workforce development for particular populations that really need that. And finally, exploring opportunities for community-led and or bottom-up economic development. So James, I don't know if you have anything you want to quickly add. I'm gonna move us right through here.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Chair. And I would just elevate that the council has been meeting on taking aspects of the strategic plan and having presentations and input. So far, we've been to Espanola, Las Cruces, Silver City, Socorro, Santa Teresa. We did not meet we changed that to a virtual meeting. And we are looking forward to be in the Four Corners region at some point, actually this coming August. And we also want to be down in Mescalero / Ruidoso, which we hope will be a joint meeting followed up for the task force in Ruidoso. The last thing I'll add is to elevate that there are 3 working groups. One in collaboration with the Indian Affairs Department on tribal consultation, a second one that is being established around community engagement, and then a third one that I'm excited to establish is a working group that represents the Permian Basin, because we don't currently have a council member that represents that part of the state.
Great, thank you so much, Chair Poviwa. So I'm going to stop share, and we only have, I see Lucinda Cito on this call from Tax and Rev, so we don't have all the relevant stakeholders here in terms of planning for next month's session on revenue diversification. You will have seen an email from me on that, and so the agencies are going to be putting their heads together to formulate some good slides and data to share with the public and consider amongst ourselves. We are trying to identify a venue. EWS has graciously offered their space in Albuquerque. And so please, if anyone else has an offering of a conference room that we can utilize, please let me know. And with that, I think we'll just ask if there's any public comment here online. All right, seeing none, I think we can take a vote to adjourn. And so is there a vote to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Okay, that was Raquel. Is there a second?
This is James.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, we will now adjourn this meeting of the Sustainable Economy Task Force at 3:44 on Thursday, July 25th. Thank you so much, everybody.